They said it wouldn't work. They said her game was too flashy, too risky, too dependent on spacing that didn't exist at this level. They said the WNBA was going to humble her, expose her, and ultimately prove every doubter right. Coaches whispered it. Critics put it on camera. And for a stretch of games, it honestly looked like they might have had a point. But then something shifted. Something that nobody on the outside saw coming. The Indiana Fever started winning. Caitlin Clark started taking over. And suddenly, every single person who spent months building arguments against her had gone very, very quiet. This isn't just a comeback story. This is the story of what happens when an entire league realizes, too late, that they completely underestimated someone. And trust me, the way this thing unfolded, you're not going to want to miss a single second. For months, the narrative was brutal. Not just critical, brutal. Every time the Fever struggled, the same voices came rushing back in, pointing at Clark and saying, "This is exactly what we told you." The argument was simple on the surface, but nasty underneath. Her style, the deep threes, the no-look passes, the pace she wanted to play at supposedly didn't translate. The spacing wasn't there. The roster wasn't built for it. The league was too physical, too experienced, too wise to her tricks. And every single game that went sideways became fresh ammunition. Every turnover, every off-shooting night, every loss got filed under the same category, proof that Caitlin Clark was the problem. What made it worse was that the debate never stayed on the court. It spilled into every comment section, every sports radio segment, every YouTube video with a spicy thumbnail. Was Clark the issue? Was it the system around her? Was the coaching wrong? Was the roster wrong? Nobody could agree. And that disagreement, that constant, rotating argument, kept the story alive week after week, dragging more people into the conversation every single time. The Fever weren't just a basketball team anymore. They had become a flashpoint. And for a while, it felt like the critics were winning the argument just as much as the teams on the court were winning games. But here's what the critics missed. They were so focused on finding the cracks that they stopped paying attention to what was slowly being built underneath. Something was developing inside that locker room, on those practice floors, in those film sessions, and it was about to announce itself in a way nobody was prepared for. Because the moment everything started clicking, it didn't just click quietly. It clicked loudly, publicly, and in front of everyone who'd spent all that time talking. 21 points, 14 assists, 5 rebounds. Those are the numbers that sat at the center of what was, even on an off-shooting night, one of the most complete performances Clark had put together all season. She was 1 of 8 from 3, 5 of 15 from the floor overall. By the numbers on the shot chart, it looked rough, but the game itself, the game told a completely different story. 14 assists is a statement. It's a number that says, even when the shots aren't falling, I am still the engine driving everything on this floor. Every pass that found an open cutter. Every split of the defense that created a look for a teammate. Every read and transition that turned into an easy basket. None of that shows up in the shooting percentage, but all of it showed up in the result. And that result was another Fever win. The league noticed, named her Player of the Week. And that recognition came off the back of a stretch where she was shooting nearly 50% from the field and pushing 40% from 3, numbers that would make any guard in any league look good, let alone a second-year player still building chemistry. This was not a fluke. This was not noise. This was evidence. Evidence that the version of the Fever everyone had been asking about, the dangerous, fast, free-flowing version, might actually be showing up. And the timing of it, the timing made it hit different, because this performance didn't come during a soft stretch of the schedule. It came right when the pressure was highest, right when the questions were loudest, right when everyone was watching to see if she'd crack. She didn't crack. She dealt 14 dimes and walked off the floor with another W, and what happened next made the whole thing even bigger. Here's the thing about momentum in basketball. It doesn't always come from where you expect it. Sometimes the shot that wakes a building up doesn't come from your star. Sometimes it comes from someone flying completely under the radar, someone the opponent forgot to account for, someone who's been waiting for exactly this moment to remind everybody why she's on the court. That person, on this particular night, was Sophie Cunningham. The crowd was flat. That's not an exaggeration. People who were there and people watching at home said the same thing, until Sophie went absolutely off. 6 of 7 from 3, 8 of 11 from the floor, 24 points off the bench in just 24 minutes. Numbers so clean they almost looked made up. She didn't miss her first shot until practically the fourth quarter. For 3 full quarters, she was virtually automatic, draining everything Caitlin Clark put in her hands, punishing every defense that forgot she existed for even half a second. What made it even more interesting was the historical context, because Sophie Cunningham had done this exact thing before. Go back and look at the tape from last year. There was a 6-week stretch where she went on a similarly absurd tear from 3, and that stretch, that one player getting scorching hot for 6 weeks, was a massive piece of why the Fever managed to sneak into the playoffs at all. And now, heading into the next stretch of games, it looked like that same gear had clicked back in. The blonde bomber was back. The connection between her and Clark finding her on the move, Sophie stepping into the shot without hesitation, the ball barely touching her hands before it was already on its way to the net, was becoming one of the most dangerous 2-player combinations in the entire league. And people were just starting to figure that out. But here's where the conversation got uncomfortable. Because while everyone was celebrating Sophie's explosion off the bench, a different realization was creeping in at the same time. One that nobody really wanted to say out loud, but everybody was thinking. Sophie Cunningham isn't just a spark plug off the bench for the Indiana Fever. She's essentially the only asterisk bench scorer they have. That's it, full stop. Raven Johnson is not putting up points off the pine. Maisha Hines-Allen is not a scoring option in that role. Michaela Timpson is not someone defenses are staying up at night game planning for offensively. The honest reality of the Fever roster right now is that if Sophie Cunningham has a cold night, the bench goes completely silent. 0 offensive production from the second unit. And in a league where depth can be the difference between a first-round exit and a legitimate playoff run, that's a vulnerability that cannot be papered over forever. There's another piece of this that was driving Clark's supporters absolutely insane during this stretch of games. The missed layups. Not one missed layup. Not 2. A parade of them. Aaliyah Boston, Lexi Hull, Michaela Timpson, Sophie herself, all of them leaving points at the rim that should have been automatic. And every single missed layup was an assist that didn't get credited to Caitlin Clark's line. The conversation kept circling back to the same point. Clark could have finished with 20 assists in this game, 20 asterisk. She was doing everything right at the point of attack, finding people in perfect positions, and the finishing just wasn't there. That's not Clark's fault. But it's a problem that needs to get fixed, and fast, because she can't keep doing this much work and leaving this many points on the table because of incomplete execution around her. Something else happened in this game that set social media on fire in a completely different direction, and it had nothing to do with the final score. Maisha Hines-Allen took an absolute shot to the face, blood everywhere, head snapping back. The kind of hit that stops play in any game at any level in any league. The whistle never came. No foul, no stoppage, nothing. She had to leave the court to get it addressed, while everyone in the building looked around at each other like they'd just watched something impossible happen. And it wasn't an isolated moment. The same game where Hines-Allen bled all over the floor without getting a call was the same game where Clark was getting hammered on drive after drive in the first quarter. 3 straight possessions. Contact every time. Whistles, 0. Fans had been patient about this all season, hoping the league would self-correct, hoping the messaging about more consistent officiating would translate to actual games. It hadn't, at least not on this night. Now, to be fair, Clark did leave 4 free throws on the floor herself, and those 4 missed free throws are inexcusable. That's not a refereeing issue, that's just execution, and it needs to be better. But the bigger picture here is that the officiating inconsistency is a real story, one that keeps resurfacing every few games, one that even people who don't have a dog in the Clark debate are starting to notice. Referees were supposed to be calling a tighter, fairer game this season. What happened on this night suggested that message hadn't reached everyone with a whistle. Here's what changes when you start winning consistently. Executives notice. Rival coaches notice. Front offices that spent all offseason convinced your team wasn't a real threat start pulling up film and having meetings they didn't schedule before. The Indiana Fever are now on that list, and names like Ember Cox are starting to circulate in the same breath as Fever discussions, because smart people in league circles understand that momentum like this doesn't happen in isolation. It's being built by design, and the design is working. The other number that's starting to move: attendance, fan engagement. The people who were on the fence about spending money on Fever games are making different decisions now. The debate at the start of the season was about whether the casual fan would show up for this team, for this style, for this player. And the answer coming back from the real world, not the pundit world, not the hot take economy, was a slow but unmistakable yes. Fans are voting, not with tweets, with their actual money and their actual presence in those seats. And the number they keep coming back for is 42. But more than any individual number, they're coming back for the feeling of watching a team that finally looks like it knows what it wants to be. The offense isn't just running plays, it's running asterisk with asterisk something now. There's an urgency to it. A confidence in the reads Clark is making, a trust that the people around her are going to be in the right spots. That trust didn't exist at the same level 6 weeks ago. It does now. And the rest of the league, they can feel it. So here's the thing that's keeping rival fan bases awake right now. Not what Caitlin Clark is doing today, what she might do next. Because if this version of the Fever, the dangerous version, the fast version, the version where Clark is playing freely and Sophie is on a heater, and the whole offense starts to flow, is real and sustainable, the rest of the league has a serious problem. A problem that gets bigger every single week the chemistry improves. What happens when Aaliyah Boston is finishing those layups consistently? What happens when the bench situation gets addressed, and there's a second scoring option behind Sophie coming off the pine? What happens when Clark's shooting catches up to her playmaking, when she's dropping 25 points and 14 assists instead of 21 on an off-shooting night? The math starts getting very uncomfortable for everyone not wearing a Fever uniform. And that's not speculation. That's just the logical endpoint of a trajectory that's already clearly headed in one direction. The critics built their entire argument on the idea that her game had a ceiling in this league, that there was a version of professional basketball that would neutralize everything she brought to the table and expose the limits underneath. But the ceiling they projected, it keeps not showing up. Every time someone has called a limit, she's pushed past it. And every time the Fever have looked like they were backing down from a moment, they've gone right at it instead. At some point, the argument runs out of room. And that point is getting close. Here's the part that nobody who spent months building the Clark can't work in the WNBA argument is going to enjoy hearing. She's not just succeeding. She's succeeding in exactly the way, in exactly the asterisk style, that they said was incompatible with this league. The deep threes, the no-look passes, the pace, the playmaking, all of it. The very things that were supposed to be her weaknesses are showing up as weapons, and the Indiana Fever are building something real around them. That doesn't mean everything is perfect. The bench depth issue is real. The officiating frustrations are real. The missed layups and the free throw inconsistency are real. This team still has work to do. But the foundation, the direction, the identity, those things are no longer in question. The Fever know who they are. And who they are is becoming very dangerous very quickly. The critics had their moment. They asked their questions. They made their arguments. And the answer coming back from the floor every single night is louder than anything they can say on camera. Some stories, you think you know the ending before it happens. This one, you're going to want to keep watching, because the best part hasn't arrived yet.